Sorry, ma'am, this isn't a bring-your-mom-to-work day. The general's voice dripped with scorn. He pointed at the $50 million war machine. Now, who let a mechanic anywhere near my Valkyrie's cockpit? The first tendrils of dawn had yet to breach the horizon over the Mojave Desert, but the hangar at the Viper's Nest Advanced Aviation Test Range was already a hive of subdued activity. Fluorescent lights cast a sterile, greenish glow over the polished concrete floor, a stark contrast to the immense, predatory shapes hulking in the shadows. These were the AH-70 Valkyries, the apex predators of modern aerial warfare, each a $50 million symphony of composite armor, advanced stealth technology, and devastating firepower. And to Ava Rostova, they were old friends. At 40, Ava moved with a quiet economy of motion that made her seem almost invisible against the backdrop of bustling, younger ground crews. A few strands of silver streaked through the dark hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun. Her hands, though meticulously clean, bore the fine, silvery scars of a life spent with tools and machinery. But it was her eyes that set her apart. They were calm, a serene gray, yet they held a sharpness that seemed to pierce through the metal skin of the helicopters, seeing not just the wires and hydraulics, but the very soul of the machines. For the past 2 years at Viper's Nest, she was simply Ava, the senior airframe technician. A ghost in grease-stained coveralls. She was good at her job, unervingly so. She could diagnose a hydraulic leak by its scent on the air or predict a gearbox failure by a subtle vibration no instrument could yet detect. The pilots, cocky and brilliant young men and women in their 20s, treated her with a kind of benign condescension. She was the mechanic mom, the one who signed off on their pre-flight checks, a reliable, if unremarkable, part of the scenery. They had no idea. As she ran a diagnostic on Valkyrie 3, its fuselage cooled beneath her touch, a memory flickered, unbidden. It wasn't a diagram from a technical manual. It was the smell of ozone and hot dust, the percussive thump-thump-thump of rotor blades slicing through the air over a jagged, moonlit mountain range somewhere that didn't officially exist. It was the jarring lurch as a surface-to-air missile screamed past her canopy, close enough to see the incandescent glow of its motor. She could almost feel the phantom pressure of the cyclic stick in her right hand, the collective in her left, her body and the machine moving as one entity, a dance on the knife edge of oblivion. She blinked, and the memory receded, leaving only the quiet hum of the hangar's ventilation system. "Everything good to go, Ava?" The voice, loud and laced with the easy confidence of youth, belonged to Lieutenant Leo Martinez. He was the current star of the program, a pilot with preternatural reflexes and an ego to match. He leaned against the nose of the Valkyrie, thumbs hooked in his flight suit, a picture of casual arrogance. "There's a microfracture on the trailing edge of Blade 2, Lieutenant," Ava said, her voice soft, never looking up from her datapad. "It's within tolerance for today's high-G evaluation, but it's propagating. Another 20 flight hours and it'll be out of spec. I've flagged it for replacement in the next service cycle." Leo scoffed, a barely audible puff of air. "Always so cautious, Ava. It's a test flight, not a combat drop. A mechanic sees a hairline crack, a pilot understands material tolerances. Don't worry your head about the aerodynamics." He patted the Valkyrie's flank as if it were a prized horse. "She and I understand each other." Ava didn't reply. She just signed off on the release form, her expression unreadable. She had seen fractures like that before. She had seen what they could do when subjected to the stress of a sudden, violent evasive maneuver at low altitude. She understood material tolerances better than he could ever imagine. But her job now wasn't to argue. It was to observe, to maintain, and to remain silent. Her expertise was a ghost, a specter of a past life buried under layers of classification so thick they were effectively a tombstone. Later that afternoon, the squadron was in chaos. A sudden VIP visit had scrambled the training schedule, and 2 evaluators had been grounded by a sudden stomach bug that ripped through the officers' mess. They were short-staffed for the afternoon's critical simulator sessions, a new software package that needed pilot feedback. In the harried reshuffling, a new administrative clerk, overwhelmed and just trying to fill slots, scrolled through the personnel roster. He saw the name, A. Rostova, listed with a dormant, unupdated, helicopter pilot, qualification from years ago. Assuming it was a data entry error and that she was a reserve pilot assigned to maintenance, he clicked the name. On the digital roster posted outside the simulator bay, a new name appeared at the bottom of the backup list. To everyone who saw it, it was a joke, a typo, a glitch in the system. But to the gears of fate, it was the insertion of a key into a lock that had been rusted shut for years. The simulator briefing room was cold, the air thick with the scent of coffee and institutional authority. It was the domain of Brigadier General Miles Vance. Vance was a man forged by the rulebook, a decorated commander whose career was built on unyielding standards and a rigid adherence to protocol. He stood before the assembled group of elite pilots, his posture ramrod straight, his gaze sweeping across them with an intensity that could peel paint. He was in his late 50s, his face a roadmap of desert campaigns, his presence sucking the very air out of the room. "Today's evaluation is critical," he began, his voice a low growl that commanded instant attention. "The Pentagon wants our feedback on the new Valkyrie threat response software. This isn't a game. This is about ensuring our pilots have the edge. We need precision. We need excellence." His eyes scanned the digital roster projected on the screen behind him, and then he stopped. He squinted, his head tilting slightly as if he'd encountered a line of corrupted code. "Rostova," he said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He turned to his aide. "Is this a joke? Who is A. Rostova?" A young captain started to speak. "Sir, we were short-handed, and the system shows she has a prior flight qual." Vance cut him off with a flick of his wrist. His glare returned to the room, colder this time. "A prior qualification? I'm not entrusting a $50 million simulation cycle, let alone a real aircraft, to someone whose primary function is to wipe grease off a landing strut." He picked up a printed copy of the roster from the table and held it up with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. Who in their right mind thought our elite aviators needed guidance from a lubrication specialist? A wave of snickers rippled through the pilots. Leo Martinez, in the front row, smirked openly. It was the perfect encapsulation of their view of the quiet technician. Competent in her own sphere, but utterly out of place here, in the world of the Eagles. Throughout it all, Ava stood near the back of the room, her presence so unassuming she might have been a shadow. She hadn't said a word. The mockery, the condescension, it wasn't new. It was the same abrasive noise she had learned to filter out years ago. But today was different. Something had shifted. The name on that list wasn't just a mistake, it was a ghost rattling its chains. General Vance crumpled the paper and tossed it into a bin with theatrical disgust. Let this be a lesson in administrative competence. Now, let's get back to the pilots who actually belong here. General. The word was not loud, but it cut through the room with the clean, sharp finality of a blade. Every head turned. Ava had spoken. She took one step forward, out of the shadows. Vance's eyes narrowed into slits. The audacity was astounding. "Do you have something to say, mechanic?" The title was a deliberate insult. Ava didn't answer his question. Instead, with a slow, deliberate motion, she reached for the zipper on her grimy, oil-stained coveralls. The sound of the metal teeth parting was unnaturally loud in the sudden, tense silence. The pilots watched, confused and intrigued. Was she about to quit? Make a scene? She shrugged the heavy canvas from her shoulders, letting it fall to the floor in a heap. Underneath, she wore a simple, dark gray, long-sleeved uniform, the kind worn for utility and not for show. It was bare, with no rank insignia, no name tag. Except for one thing. On her right shoulder was a patch. It wasn't a standard-issue squadron patch. This was something else entirely. It was intricately embroidered, depicting a phoenix wrought from what looked like shattered metal, rising from a bed of ghostly gray flames. The design was stark, brutal, and possessed a haunting beauty. The room held its breath. The patch meant nothing to the younger pilots. It was just a cool, non-regulation design. But General Vance saw it, and the blood drained from his face. His carefully constructed mask of command cracked. His jaw went slack, and the sharp, dismissive light in his eyes was instantly extinguished, replaced by a dawning, horrified recognition. The silence was no longer tense, it was absolute, a crushing weight. He took a half-step back, an involuntary movement of shock. A name, a whisper from the deepest, darkest vaults of military intelligence, escaped his lips, barely audible but echoing in the tomb-like quiet of the room. God! He breathed. Are you Spectre? The call sign hung in the air, an incantation that transformed the room's atmosphere. Spectre. To the young pilots like Leo, it was a name from a ghost story, a boogeyman whispered about in the barracks after too many beers. The stories were always the same, a top-secret special operations unit, that a phantom wing, so classified that officially acknowledging its existence was an act of treason. They were the pilots sent in when all hope was lost, flying missions that were never logged, in aircraft that were technically never there. Their symbol was the Ghost Phoenix. Their operational records weren't just sealed, they were digitally shredded, burned, and buried in encrypted servers accessible only to a handful of individuals in the Pentagon. Leo felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He remembered the legend of Operation Storm Eye, a disastrous mission deep in enemy territory where an entire Special Forces team had been declared lost, cut off and surrounded. The official after-action report stated there were no survivors and no recovery attempt was possible. But the rumor, the one that got you a stern warning from your commanding officer for even repeating it, was that a single, unidentified helicopter had punched through an impossible wall of anti-aircraft fire, in a sandstorm that had grounded every other aircraft in the theater, and had pulled out half the team. The pilot of that bird was known only by one name, Spectre. He stared at the quiet, 40-year-old woman, the one he had dismissed an hour ago, and felt a profound, gut-wrenching shame. General Vance's mind was racing, connecting dots he never knew existed. He recalled a classified briefing years ago about the Storm Eye debacle. A heavily redacted transcript of the sole survivor's debrief. A single, cryptic phrase, "The Phoenix came for us." He had dismissed it as the rambling of a traumatized soldier. Now, standing before him, was the ghost from that report. He realized with sickening clarity that the unassuming mechanic who checked his fleet's oil pressure was a living legend, a pilot whose skills were considered mythological. The silence was finally broken by Vance, his voice strained, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. The official record states there were no survivors from that unit's final mission. Ava's gray eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw the immense weight behind them. It wasn't the weariness of a mechanic, it was the profound stillness of someone who had stared into the abyss and hadn't blinked. "The official record is incomplete, General," she stated, her voice even. "Survivors get to write the history. The dead are tasked with keeping the secrets. I survived." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And yes, I was piloting that Valkyrie." The collective gasp from the young pilots was sharp. She hadn't just flown an older model Apache as her dormant file suggested. She had flown this machine, the Valkyrie, in the very combat conditions they were about to simulate. The power dynamic in the room hadn't just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably inverted. Ava Rostova was no longer a mechanic in a room full of pilots. She was the apex predator in a room full of cubs. Vance struggled to reconcile the figure before him with the specter of legend. His entire worldview, built on the bedrock of official records, ranks, and regulations, was crumbling. This woman's very existence was a violation of his ordered universe. But the patch on her shoulder was undeniable. It was a symbol of an echelon of skill and sacrifice he had only ever heard about in hushed, reverent tones. It was an artifact from a world far beyond his own experience. A new expression settled on his face, a complex mixture of awe, deep-seated skepticism, and a glimmer of professional curiosity he couldn't suppress. The general in him, the man responsible for the lethality of his wing, took over. He had to know. He had to see. He pointed a single, trembling finger toward the gleaming, state-of-the-art simulator bay. The simulator, he commanded, his voice now a hoarse whisper. Now. Prove you still have it. The inside of the AH-70 Valkyrie simulator was an exact replica of the real thing, a cramped cockpit filled with the glow of multifunction displays and the faint scent of ozone. As Ava strapped herself into the pilot's seat, her movements were fluid, economical, and devoid of hesitation. She didn't glance around like a visitor. She settled in like a queen returning to her throne. In the observation room behind her, a wall of glass separated her from General Vance, his senior instructor, and the entire cohort of young pilots, who now watched with a mixture of apprehension and breathless anticipation. Initiating standard warm-up sequence, the senior instructor, a man named Chief Warrant Officer Davis, announced over the intercom, his voice professionally flat. Target acquisition and evasion drill. On the panoramic screens that formed Ava's world, a hostile urban environment materialized. The simulation began. But Ava didn't follow the textbook warm-up. Her first action was to flip open a guarded panel and toggle a series of switches. "Ma'am, you've just disabled the flight assistance AI," Davis said, his voice laced with confusion. "Threat response protocols are offline." In a high-intensity electronic warfare environment, General, Ava's voice came over the comms, calm and didactic, "Your AI's safe evasions are predictable. They broadcast your intentions. Relying on it is how you become a smoking hole in the ground." Before they could respond, she pushed the cyclic forward, plunging the virtual Valkyrie into the maze of skyscrapers. The flight was unlike anything they had ever seen. It wasn't the aggressive, high-G maneuvering of an airshow pilot, it was something more primal, more efficient. She didn't fly over the city, she flowed through it, using buildings as shields, their shadows as camouflage. Initiating Canyon Run scenario, Davis announced, fast-forwarding the program. A deep, treacherous series of canyons replaced the city. Multiple enemy radar locks blared to life. Instead of climbing or trying to outrun the locks, Ava did something that made Leo gasp. She rolled the Valkyrie sharply onto its side and dropped, hugging the canyon wall so closely that her rotor tip seemed to be mere inches from the rock. Then, she executed a maneuver that didn't exist in any training manual. She kicked the anti-torque pedals hard, using the ground effect from the canyon floor to slide the multi-ton aircraft sideways in a controlled, high-speed drift around a sharp bend. The radar locks broke instantly. What in God's name was that? Vance breathed, his knuckles white where he gripped the console. I've never seen that before," Davis stammered, his eyes wide. "The physics, she's using ground effect like a race car uses drafting. The system is flagging it as catastrophic proximity warning, but she's in perfect control." Ava's voice returned, still unnervingly calm. "We called it the ghost drift. Useful for breaking line of sight in confined terrain. The designers never intended the airframe to do it, but the airframe doesn't get a vote when you're being painted by enemy fire." The final test was the ultimate nightmare scenario, total system failure. The screens went black. All instrument readouts vanished. A cacophony of failure alarms blared. Total avionics failure. Zero visibility. "You are flying blind," Davis announced, a grim finality in his tone. This was the unwinnable scenario, designed to test a pilot's grace under pressure before they inevitably crashed. But Ava didn't panic. The observation room watched, mesmerized, as her hands continued to move over the controls with purpose. They could hear her soft humming over the open mic, a strange, tuneless melody. She was flying by feel, by the subtle changes in the simulator's hydraulic feedback, by the sound of the rotor wash echoing off the unseen virtual canyon walls, a symphony of steel and instinct that only she could hear. For 30 agonizing seconds, she flew the dead machine. Then, with a series of precise, gentle inputs, she brought the nose up. A soft bump shuddered through the simulator. The failure alarm ceased. A message flashed on Davis's control screen: aircraft landed. Manual flare. Structural integrity, 100%. Silence reigned in the observation room. Ava had landed a blind, dead helicopter in the middle of a canyon. The final performance report flashed up, a mess of red warnings and alerts. It read, evaluation rating, invalid. Pilot exceeded safe operational parameters on 97% of maneuvers. Davis slowly turned to the general, his face pale, his professional composure shattered. He swallowed hard. "General," he said, his voice trembling with a profound, earth-shaking realization. That wasn't a test. That wasn't an evaluation. That was art. That was art bought with blood and paid for by ghosts. We have nothing to teach her." The next morning, the air at Viper's Nest was different. The story of the mechanic who silenced a general and broke the simulator had spread like wildfire. The mood was no longer mockery, but a thick, palpable curiosity. General Vance had cancelled all other evaluations. There would be only one flight today. Ava Rostova was to take a Valkyrie into the sky. Her test ground, a treacherous stretch of mountains known to the pilots as the Leviathan's Ridge, a place of notoriously unpredictable crosswinds and jagged peaks used to push the AH-70 to its absolute limits. During the pre-flight check, the atmosphere was electric. The elite crew assigned to Vance's personal command, men who considered themselves the best of the best, moved with a new, deferential stiffness around Ava. She was no longer just a mechanic, she was an oracle. She moved around the Valkyrie with a familiar grace, her touch light, her eyes missing nothing. She stopped at the portside engine housing, running her bare fingers along a thick hydraulic line deep within the machinery. "This line needs to be replaced," she said quietly to the crew chief. The chief, a master sergeant with 20 years of experience, frowned and checked his own readings. "Ma'am, the pressure diagnostics are green across the board. It's perfectly within specs. The pressure is fine now, in the cool of the hangar," Ava explained, her gaze distant, seeing something they couldn't. "But I can feel a faint vibration in the bracing. A crystallization from repeated high G stress. In training, it holds. But in sustained, high-torque combat maneuvering, where the metal heats and flexes, it will fail. And it will fail at the worst possible moment." The crew chief, skeptical but shaken by her certainty, used a portable microscopic scanner on the spot. After a moment, his eyes widened. He showed the datapad to Ava. A hairline, almost invisible fracture network was visible deep within the metal structure. It was a catastrophic failure waiting to happen, a ghost in the machine that every one of their state-of-the-art diagnostic tools had missed. The crew chief looked at Ava, no longer with deference, but with pure, unadulterated awe. Once airborne, Ava's mastery was a thing of terrifying beauty. It wasn't the flashy, aggressive style of the young aces. It was something quieter, deeper. It was the absolute economy of motion. She made the 12-ton war machine feel as light and nimble as a hummingbird. She didn't fight the wind currents of the Leviathan's Ridge, she danced with them, using their energy to lift and turn, conserving fuel and minimizing stress on the airframe. The chase pilot, a top instructor flying a nimble fighter jet to observe, was left breathless. His comms transmissions to the control tower, where General Vance stood watching a radar screen with unnerving intensity, told the whole story. "Tower, this is Voodoo 2. I can't describe this. She's not flying patterns, she's painting on the terrain. Her flight path is so efficient, it's almost organic. She's navigating the ridge like she has a topographical map burned into her brain." A pause, filled with the sound of the jet's engine. "My God, Tower. She isn't just avoiding the turbulence. She's using the updrafts from the cliff faces to gain altitude without increasing power. Who is this woman? General Vance stood motionless, his eyes locked on the green blip that represented Ava's Valkyrie. He saw it move with a grace and precision that defied the laws of physics he knew. He was watching a level of symbiosis between pilot and machine that he had previously thought was only theoretical. He was witnessing perfection. When Ava guided the Valkyrie back to the tarmac, its landing was so gentle it seemed to kiss the ground. The massive rotors spun down with a sigh. The canopy opened. As Ava descended the ladder, her face was serene, betraying no emotion other than the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. She had not proven a point. She had simply stated a fact. She walked towards the hangar, expecting to be debriefed. But General Vance met her on the runway. The entire squadron, pilots and ground crew alike, watched from a distance. He said nothing. The wind whipped across the tarmac, pulling at his uniform. He looked at the 40-year-old woman, at the faint traces of oil still under her fingernails, at the ancient wisdom in her gray eyes. Then, in the stark desert light, in front of everyone he commanded, Brigadier General Miles Vance squared his shoulders, raised his hand to his brow, and rendered a slow, perfect, formal military salute. It was not a salute to a subordinate. It was a salute of profound respect, an apology, a concession, and an acknowledgement, all in one silent, powerful gesture. It was a general bowing to a master. The salute on the tarmac echoed far beyond the runway. In the days that followed, offers flooded General Vance's office. The Pentagon wanted to debrief her. The Valkyrie design team wanted her as a consultant. Flight schools wanted her as their chief instructor. Ava Rostova, the Ghost, had become the most sought-after asset in military aviation. She turned them all down. She refused the promotions, the accolades, the chance to be put on a pedestal. Her reasoning, delivered to a bewildered General Vance, was simple. A pedestal is a stationary target, General. I'm more useful on the ground. Instead, she made a single, humble request. She wanted permission to use Hangar 4 on Saturdays, to host an informal, voluntary, mechanics and tactics workshop. A place where pilots and ground crew could meet as equals, to talk not about regulations, but about reality. The first Saturday, only a few people showed up. Leo Martinez was there, his youthful arrogance replaced by a quiet, earnest humility. A handful of other young pilots and a couple of curious crew chiefs joined him. They sat on upturned supply crates while Ava, using a simple whiteboard and a discarded Valkyrie engine component, explained the intricate relationship between hydraulic pressure and a pilot's feel for the aircraft. Within a month, the workshop was the most popular event on the base. By the third month, people were driving in from other bases, having heard rumors of a legendary pilot who was teaching the secrets that weren't in the manuals. The hangar was packed every Saturday, a vibrant community of learners gathered around the quiet woman in the simple gray uniform. One evening, a fresh-faced new recruit, emboldened by the informal atmosphere, asked the question everyone was thinking. "Ma'am, that patch. The phantom wing. You still wear it. Is it because you're proud of what you did?" Ava stopped what she was doing and looked at the sea of faces, all watching her intently. "I don't wear it for pride, son," she said, her voice carrying a profound weight. "Pride is a luxury. I wear this to remember the ones who aren't here to teach you these lessons. This patch is a reminder that some knowledge is bought at a terrible price. My responsibility," she met the eyes of Leo, then the others, "is to make sure none of you ever have to pay that price to learn it." Her legacy was cemented not in a single act of defiance, but in the hundreds of quiet moments of teaching that followed. She taught pilots how to listen to their machines, and she taught mechanics how to understand the pilot's life depended on their hands. She bridged the gap between the sky and the ground. Years later, General Vance, on the eve of his retirement, personally authored a proposal to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It was a radical new training doctrine for elite aviators, focused on instinct, adaptability, and a deep, symbiotic understanding of the machine. It was based entirely on the lessons from Ava's Saturday workshops. They named it the Spectre Protocol. Ava's story became a quiet legend, a reminder that true expertise doesn't need to announce itself. It simply performs when the moment demands it. Her patch represented more than a personal achievement. It symbolized the silent competence of countless individuals who perform critical, unglamorous work in the shadows, their skills the bedrock upon which the heroes stand. In your own life, you've surely encountered a specter, a quiet colleague, a humble mentor, an overlooked expert whose true value isn't listed on any official roster. They are the invisible architects of success, the silent guardians of quality. Take a moment to recognize them. In the comments below, share a story about someone you know who is being undervalued, or simply tag them and write the words, "Your patch still has value." Please, comment with respect, because every unsung hero deserves to be seen. And if you believe in the power of quiet competence, make sure to subscribe for more stories about the true nature of strength.